New worries this hour over the Iran nuclear deal. As we just showed you, President Bill Clinton cut a deal with North Korea back in 1994, and at the time, it was heralded. But look where we are now. Let's find out from General Jack Keane, who says be cautious now about what? About the nuclear deal? We know that President Trump is very, very much against it. He feels that already Iran has violated the spirit of it, General. So what do you think now happens in light of the fact that there are really big tensions now with North Korea?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that Iran and North Korea are like cousins. And Iran is actually executing the North Korean playbook in terms of developing a nuclear weapon and eventually ballistic missiles and eventually intercontinental ballistic missiles. The missiles that the Iranians are using now came from North Korea. The technology that they will use to advance their own nuclear weapon system comes from North Korea. When North Korea is testing a nuclear weapon, Iranian officials are normally present for that. So they are aligned together. And Iran, if it's ever permitted to acquire intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons, they will become not just a regional menace, but they will become an absolute global threat and a global menace that will dwarf the North Koreans. Well,
it'll sure make the supporters of this Iran nuclear deal look awfully stupid, because at this point, when President Trump talks about violating the spirit of the deal, he's talking about those missile tests that Iran has constantly done. And then, of course, on one of them, he wrote in Hebrew lettering, Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth. So at what point do the Europeans or the Soviets, forget it, but the Europeans at least say, that's not okay, and they may get burned, right?
Yes. Every single year, it's interesting you mentioned that point about Israel. Every single year since 1980, when the Islamic Republic of Iran was established post-revolution and the ouster of the Shah, they have stated unequivocally, our intention is to dominate and spread the Islamic revolution throughout the Middle East. There are two objectives we have to achieve to be able to do that. One is drive the United States out of the Middle East, and that's when they began killing us and blowing up our embassies and our barracks and killing our soldiers and civilians in 1980 on, 35 plus years of that. Secondly, and every single year they mention what you just mentioned, that our objective is also to destroy the state of Israel.
Yeah, us and Israel. It's ridiculous. And then it makes me wonder, and you'd be a really perfect person to ask, are we on the path to war with either one of these nations? And if so, what would you do to get us off that path and divert it?
Well, first of all, this is obviously, as we've been talking about for weeks, with North Korea, is a very dangerous situation, and certainly war is a possibility. I do think this country will be able to avoid that. And the reason for that is that this very aggressive policy that North Korea has, and unequivocally, I'll tell you, supported by China, is because of the Obama administration. They believed that the United States had really pulled back from the world, and they were going to be able to have their way throughout Asia and the Western Pacific and throughout the the Korean Peninsula. But the reality is they did not count on the Trump administration. Now they are dealing with the reality of a different president who's asserting American leadership in the world again, reassuring our allies, and is willing to stand up for our values, our national interest, and our allies. And that is where we are. And I believe as we move closer and closer to this crisis and it gets more dangerous, the Trump administration will eventually, they're holding back right now because they want China to help, but I believe they will unload on China at some point.
Well, talk softly, but carry a big stick right now. It's talk loudly, and we'll have to wait to see the big stick.
And carry a big stick.
Yeah, both. I guess the two can go together. Thank you, General. General Jack Keane.
Good.